I want to introduce to you now our first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Wes Nemenz, and he is the Senior Education Manager for the Trevor Project. And the Trevor Project is the nation's leading organization providing suicide prevention and crisis intervention resources for lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and questioning youth. Wes has done extensive amount of advocacy work, did work in North Carolina, and helped to successfully pass the School Violence Prevention Act, which was the South's first ever LGBT inclusive anti-bullying bill. Now he's doing his work up in the New York area, and he is a proud voice for social justice and an advocate for students. And like many people in the world, he also has a Western Pennsylvania connection, having been born up in Erie. So welcome, please, Wes Nemenz.
My name is Wes Nemenz. I'm the Education Manager East Coast for the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is the nation's leading crisis intervention and suicide prevention organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. And we were invited today to just speak about the experiences of LGBTQ youth regarding their victimization in schools, their likelihood or warning signs of suicide, and specifically what folks here in Pittsburgh can do to support those youth and promote resiliency in those youth. This is a really exciting scene here. There's a lot of people, a lot of support, and this is really kind of how change gets started. And I think the youth of Pittsburgh are really lucky to have such a great group of educators and adults who care about them and care about their safety. This is really exciting. Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yep. All right, I'm just going to pull up my presentation here. Where did we put it? Down here. My assistant. Help me.
I've been called worse.
Oh, there it is.
There we go. Yes, there we go. And there.
Thank you. All right. All right. Betty, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having us here. This is a really, really exciting turnout for you all. I'm really excited to hear that this conversation is starting here in Pittsburgh. I think that's really the first step in creating safer spaces for these youth and really advocating for these youth, and it's amazing to see such a great group of folks who care. And I just want to say personally, I'm very honored to be able to be here and that Trevor was asked to come and have a voice at this table and be part of the conversation. So thank you very, very much for including me. So what I'm here to talk to you about today really is just kind of give a brief overview of our organization and what it is that we actually do. At the end of my presentation, I'll really go over exactly what kind of resources Trevor provides. And if you're an educator or a school staff or a parent, or just a concerned Pittsburgh citizen, you will find that these resources could be helpful for you. And so in your journey in creating safer schools and safer spaces for LGBTQ youth, I'm happy to be a resource for you as you develop these kind of policies and procedures moving forward. And Trevor is happy to be a resource for you as well. So, the Trevor Project is the nation's leading organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention resources for lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, transgender, and questioning youth. And so the wonderful thing about the Trevor Project and why I'm so proud to work for Trevor is because anyone can use our resources. So clearly we need to identify the LGBTQ individuals, but anyone, regardless of how they identify, can call our lifeline and take advantage of our resources. And that's part of the reason why I think our organization is so special. And we are there to be a lifeline of support for youth who may not have that support in their schools or in their homes or in their larger communities. And so just to go over what exactly it is we're talking about today, I want to just kind of briefly give you an overview of why the Trevor Project exists. It's probably no secret to many of you, many of the challenges that LGBTQ youth face in their schools and in their personal lives. But we're going to take a look at some of the research and kind of look at exactly what's going on and why this is happening. I will leave a lot of the information on safe schools and bullying in schools to my colleague Robert and their wonderful work at GLSEN. So please know that I'm sure that that's coming and we'll have a lot of really great information for you there. And then I want to briefly touch on bullying and mental health. So we know that the conversation on bullying and victimization in schools is kind of really gaining traction, and we're hearing a lot more about it. And research is really just starting to emerge as to what exactly kind of mental health outcomes does this kind of constant bullying and victimization have, and especially on the population that we're here to talk about today, the LGBTQ youth population. And finally, I want to talk about Trevor's program, so all of our resources, and then how we can really help. And so I realize that a lot of kind of the nuances about Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh's various school systems is going to have to be something that you all kind of create on your own. But I just want to briefly hit on kind of the main things that we found in terms of promoting resiliency with LGBTQ youth. And then I do want to say I will be around afterwards for any questions, and I'm happy to meet and talk with anyone afterwards. So, why the Trevor Project exists. We exist because LGBT youth are 4 times more likely to have reported a suicide attempt than their heterosexual peers. We know that this is not because that once you identify as LGBTQ, your risk for attempting automatically goes up. As Betty was saying earlier, it's really about the experiences that you carry and how you're treated in your schools, in your homes, and in your communities. And so we realize that these youth face significant challenges if there is a level of rejection that comes from those communities, including in their family environments. And LGBTQ youth who come from a highly rejecting family environment were up to 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers who came from a supportive environment. Every time I share this statistic, I get kind of a feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it never gets easier to share. And it really, really highlights how important that support from a family can really be. Now, speaking realistically, we know that that support isn't always guaranteed with a family. And Betty, I'm glad that you shared school was one of the things that saved you. And so when we know that youth aren't getting this kind of support in their communities or in their homes, school is one place where hopefully we can guarantee safety for youth. And so I'm really happy to see such a great turnout here of people who are committed to upholding that. And hopefully we can really come to a consensus about how exactly we're going to do that here in Pittsburgh. And so when we look at specific trans populations, 41% of trans folks have reported making a suicide attempt. Nearly half. That's startling. And then we look at, if we go back to youth, we look at the coming out process, we find that more than 33% have lost friends through coming out. And when we talk about the risk factors of suicide and the warning signs of suicide, one of the biggest risk factors is losing someone. And so often I think we think of, death. But for a young person in school and middle school especially, losing a best friend can be a really, really traumatic experience, especially when it comes from sharing this part about yourself. And so we know that this kind of increased victimization and losing friends can really predict a negative mental health outcome. Some of those mental health outcomes are substance use and abuse, and the likelihood that they will attempt suicide. So statistics are one thing, but at Trevor, we're very often, all of our resources are there for youth, and we're able to hear specifically what it's like to be a youth. And for many of us, maybe we've grown up and moved far away. I know some of us probably still work, obviously, in the school system here. And so this is just a case study from Ask Trevor, one of our resources, that really highlights the experience of one youth who wrote to us, and I'll read that to you all. It says, "I have been harassed at school since the 6th grade. I'm now a freshman in high school. I haven't been to school in a while because of the bullying. The last time I was at school, a bully broke my wrist, and now I have to have surgery. I told the school's principal and vice principal, but they only suspended the bully for 5 days. They also told me that I brought it on myself for being who I am. They said that I should just keep my sexuality a secret from everyone so this doesn't happen. I'm scared to go back to school because I know that the bullies will attack me again. I've been thinking about suicide a lot because of this. What do I do? Signed, Adam." And so this is actually a letter from Pennsylvania. And so this is an experience that a young person was having in a school here. And we know, unfortunately, that this isn't just something that happens in Pennsylvania. It happens in almost every school in the country. And so I just think it's really important that we highlight exactly kind of what these young people are facing. And this letter specifically highlights the kind of systematic, the failure to respond to these issues. So the principal and the vice principal even weren't helpful at all, and didn't support the safety and respect of this young person. We find often that yes, young people are engaging in this kind of victimization, and there also is a failure on school systems' parts and school staff to intervene when things are getting this serious. So what exactly are kind of the negative mental health outcomes or the mental health outcomes from bullying and victimization? And so a few things just that are up here. We know that this kind of bullying, LGBTQ-related victimization, begins as early as elementary school. I think very often in elementary school, it's not really based on a sexual orientation, but more of a young person maybe expressing themselves outside of a typical gender role, right, or a gender norm. And so once a young person expresses themselves or does something that is maybe beyond the norm, we know that that young person becomes a target for this kind of bullying and victimization. And younger people obviously report more distress related to this victimization and harassment. And when we think about the levels of support when you're younger, right, and you're carrying this weight with you, you haven't really maybe necessarily developed all of these systems of support. So systems of support with your family, with friends, with your community. When you're younger, it's much more difficult, and it's much more difficult to even kind of grasp that concept and how important that is. Something that you are probably all very familiar with is that targets are not always LGBTQ. So we know that the go-to terms fag and dyke are really just the insult of choice for anyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And racial and ethnic minority students are at higher risk for this type of bullying. So we know that this is happening. We know that this is occurring in our schools and that it is having a negative mental health outcome. Research, like I said earlier, is really just starting to kind of grasp the ways specifically that this is happening and the ways specifically that this is affecting our youth population. And so as research emerges, it helps us kind of figure out exactly what we need to do to intervene and make sure that these young people don't get to that point. And one of the strongest suggestions that I would make, and that I'm sure my colleagues will also make, is that bullying policies and anti-discrimination policies in schools need to enumerate sexual orientation and gender identity as unacceptable forms of bullying. Because then you have a law, right, that says this is prohibited, this is unacceptable. And then I think very often we find teachers, especially and school staff, who say they feel powerless because there's nothing that says specifically that they're not able to do this. And this specifically states that it's not okay. And that is a huge way of kind of securing safety and giving school staff and school professionals the backbone to be able to really carry through and follow through with that promise to keep youth safe. One other note about bullying and victimization is, as this dialogue continues, we really have to be aware that bullying and victimization isn't just bully and victim, right? There are significant mental health challenges for the quote-unquote bully, the victimizer. And we find, even specifically with LGBTQ communities, is that youth who are bullied in school, who identify as LGBTQ, are more likely to go online and victimize others. And so, very clearly, that's true to try to regain the sense of lost power, right? So youth lose that power in school. They're denied power through that kind of bullying and that victimization. And then the only way that they can really regain that sense of power is online, through cyberbullying or victimizing others online. And so we have to be really careful when we say bullying is bad, bullying is wrong, because an LGBTQ person who really needs our support and needs our help could also be, quote unquote, a bully. And so we really need to think kind of holistically about bullying and victimization and how we can really kind of change the dialogue on that as well. One more graph here from one of our researchers in San Francisco shows, this is a graph of trans-identified men and women who have experienced gender-based violence and the percentage of which reported making a suicide attempt. So the black slides or graphs here show folks who didn't experience any gender-based violence, so they weren't a victim of violence in that way. Those who did, though, let's look at the percentage of which reported making a suicide attempt. So we're at about 40% for trans men, and for trans women, 45%. So this kind of violence, whether it's physical violence or verbal violence, again, with this new emerging research, we're finding has really, really serious mental health outcomes. So really quickly, and I'll try to be quick, but I love talking about our program, so it might not be as quick as I want it to be. I want to really give you an overview of Trevor's life-saving and life-affirming resources. My hope for today would be that everyone would be able to walk away here and from here and be able to speak eloquently about the services that we provide, in case they ever come across a young person who really could benefit from these resources. And so our first resource that I want to highlight is our Lifeline. Our Lifeline is 24/7, 365 days a year. And that is just a lifeline for anyone, whether they're LGBTQ, whether they're a straight ally who has a friend who's going through a really hard time, whether they identify as asexual, pansexual, queer. Anyone can call this Lifeline, including teachers and school staff. We often have concerned adults who are calling on behalf of a young person trying to get resources in their community. The Lifeline is there for you as well. And this resource it's amazing because it is there 24/7. So you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning if you wanted to, and you just hear someone on the other line asking you what's going on. And we're really just there to listen. And so often, I think on our Lifeline, we hear stories of young people who just unload and talk for a long, long time. And someone on the other end acknowledges, that sounds really tough for you. And oftentimes, it's the first time anyone's ever actually acknowledged how difficult their situation is. And I think working with Trevor and coming into Trevor, that's something that I've learned a lot is, the older you get, the easier it is to be like, oh, it's going to be fine. I know it sucks right now. It's going to be okay, right? But what's really, really interesting is that these young people are being told that all the time from adults. And so this is really a resource where they can just be validated in those feelings. And someone will just say, yeah, it sucks. And then help them identify ways in their own community, in their lives, right now, that can make it better for them in this moment. And so it's a really empowering resource. And I know that for many young people, it's a scary resource to call a stranger. We've had teachers call with their students before, and that's absolutely okay, and you can encourage them to do that. We do have other resources available for young people who maybe don't feel comfortable reaching out over the phone. One of them, the letter that we shared earlier, is from Ask Trevor. And Ask Trevor, I like to call as like the gay Dear Abby, if you will, because anyone can write in about any question or concern that they're having regarding sexual orientation or gender identity. If they're just trying to figure some stuff out, if they want advice on how to come out, Ask Trevor is a really, really great resource for young people. And it's a really great resource for adults who work with young people, because you can go online, it's publicly posted, it's a question and answer forum on our website. You can go online and really actually just kind of put a finger on the pulse, right? And see what young people are concerned about, see what they're asking about, and see the advice that our counselors are giving. These next two programs I'm really excited about because I think it highlights kind of how groundbreaking our organization is. And so we have Trevor Space, which is a safe and secure social networking site for young people. Last week we hit 50,000 members, so it's a really, really amazing resource that decreases isolation. It's really easy for me, coming from New York, to say to young people, oh, it's going to be fine, but I grew up in North Carolina. There weren't other gay people around. There weren't trans people around. And so the isolation can be really, really tough. And so Trevor Space answers that need for young people to feel connected to other people. I talk with my hands, I'm trying so hard. For young people to feel connected with other people who are like them and who are going through the same issues as them. And so Trevor Space is really, really amazing. And the thing about all of our resources is that we definitely target 13 to 24-year-olds, but anyone can use them except for this one. Trevor Space is very strict with 13 to 24 because we want to keep it a safe space. And we want to keep it a positive space. And so that's one of the things that's so great about Trevor Space, is that it is remarkably positive. Whereas we know the things that young people face on Facebook and on Twitter and how negative those places can be, this is a place that young people actually seek out for that positivity and for that encouragement from their peers. And it's truly, truly amazing. And then finally we have Trevor Chat. And so Trevor Chat is used by many, many of our younger members. And so I think the average age on Trevor Chat is between 11 to 13. And that's because maybe they're not comfortable reaching out over the phone, or maybe they don't have access to kind of a private phone line. And Trevor Chat is there for anyone, and it's just a digital way of reaching out for help. And so the wonderful thing about Trevor Chat is that we previously only offered it on Friday afternoons, and now we're on Friday afternoons, Sunday afternoons, Mondays, and Tuesdays. And we are, hopefully by the end of this year, going to be able to offer it every afternoon, with the hope for next year to be 24/7, just like our Lifeline. And so that's really, really exciting for us. And if you want to volunteer, that's a great way that you can volunteer from here in Pittsburgh. And then finally, I just want to highlight the educational programs that we have. So we do have this program called the Lifeguard Workshop, and we're currently working on a digital curriculum so that people in Pittsburgh, for example, can get access to this education as well. And so we'll be launching that this year. That's going to be a DVD that shares Trevor's life-saving resources and information about suicide prevention with your students. And then in the meantime, we have the Survival Kit. The Survival Kit is a really, really great resource for anyone who works with young people. It just provides all of Trevor's information, some of those brochures and stickers that you saw out there, as well as activities that help build empathy amongst your students and young people. So we have really, really great activities in there that empower you to lead those activities with your young people to really kind of build that level of compassion. So really quickly, how to help. Promoting resiliency is probably the number one thing that we want to do with LGBTQ young people, and the one thing that we found that works really well in preventing suicide is helping young people problem solve. We found in people who attempt suicide have in some cases lack that skill of problem solving, and so really helping young people identify ways within their own lives, within their own communities, within their own schools, that they can make small strides to make their lives better is super, super empowering for them. Other things that we can do is help them feel connected to their family. Again, we know that this isn't necessarily realistic for some people. Oftentimes, though, we think about, family as just being the home that you live in. And so something that a tactic we use on the Lifeline very often is, well, what other family members do you have? Do you have an aunt? Do you have a grandmother or grandfather? And really kind of identifying the fact that family can be a very, very large group of people maybe you're not even related to by blood. And identifying people who are positive in that child's life that can serve that support. Caring adults, like you all who are here today. School safety, as we know, and then LGBTQ social and support networks. GLSEN is an amazing resource, and I'm so glad that you all have a chapter here. And I won't say how invaluable they will be to you. I know that they will, and I'm sure Robert will also share that with you as well. But GSAs are hugely important for young people, and a young person might not ever utilize that resource, a GSA, but simply having it in the school sends a strong message to that young person that who they are is safe and supported by other people in that school environment. And again, to get back to the problem-solving component, development of healthy coping mechanisms, introducing young people to the concept of self-care, and saying, what are some things that you do to make yourself feel better when you're stressed out? Because even as adults, when we're super stressed out and things are really intense, it kind of takes, it can be helpful to take a moment for yourself and step back and say, okay, what can I do for myself right now that's gonna calm me down a little bit? And it's never too early to introduce young people to that concept as well. And so I just want to share our vision statement with you, which is a future where the possibilities, opportunities, and dreams are the same for all youth, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And we found that one supportive adult in an environment decreases LGBTQ youth's risk for suicide by 30%, and you can be that adult. So thank you so much. This is my information. I have some business cards out there. I really, again, really appreciate you inviting us to come and be a part of this conversation. And again, I will stick around afterwards, and I'm happy to talk with anyone after we're finished here. Thank you.